Inspired by real tragedies. A love story the world tried to erase. Sarajevo, in the early 1990s, was a city of sounds. Church bells ringing beside the call to prayer, laughter rising from cafes, children kicking soccer balls across courtyards between mosques and cathedrals. It was a place where different people had lived side by side for generations, quietly proud of their mix of cultures and traditions. But beneath all the noise, something dark was starting to grow. Politics were changing. Fear was moving through the air like smoke before fire. Lejla was 17 when the world around her began to shift. She loved to draw. She carried her sketchbook everywhere, filling it with scenes from her neighborhood, portraits of women selling fruit, and old men playing chess in the square. She was Muslim, quiet but sharp, and her eyes always seemed to be watching everything at once. Her dream was to be an artist in Paris, far from the cracks that had begun forming in her city. Marko was 19, a piano student at the Sarajevo Conservatory. He came from a Serbian family. His father was a strong-willed man with strict beliefs, but Marko had his mother's gentleness. He didn't care much for politics. He loved Bach and rainy mornings, the way fingers danced on keys like language without words. They met one afternoon on the tram. She was sketching, unaware that her pencil had captured him, his profile, half lit by the window. When her sketchbook slipped off her lap, Marko caught it. He looked down, then looked at her and said with a half smile, "Is this me?" She blushed, but didn't deny it. He sat beside her, and they talked until the tram reached the last stop. That was how it began. In the weeks that followed, they met often. At first, in cafes and bookshops, then in quieter places, the edge of the river, the old stone bridge, the empty halls of the opera house. They shared everything: stories, poems, secrets. She showed him her drawings. He played for her on pianos that had lost their audiences to fear. When he played, she would close her eyes, and the world around them would disappear. They knew their love wasn't simple. In a city dividing itself into us and them, they were both. To some, that made them nothing. Then, war came. It started with street blockades, whispers, neighbors moving away. Then came the gunshots, the shelling, the electricity outages, and the water running brown. Sarajevo changed overnight. Buildings became skeletons. Markets became target zones. Streets were renamed by death. Lejla's family lost everything. Her brother joined the Bosnian army. Her father refused to leave the city. "This is our home," he said. But home was now surrounded by snipers. Marko's life changed too. His conservatory closed. His father became louder, angrier, and more dangerous. He accused Marko of being blind. "She's not one of us," he said. "You're shaming this family." But Marko loved Lejla with the kind of love that doesn't go away when things get hard. They still found ways to meet, through broken buildings, in basements, anywhere they could steal a moment from the war. One cold night, they lay on the cracked tiles of the opera house, arms around each other, listening to silence where music once lived. Marko whispered, "Let's leave. I know someone who can get us out through the tunnel. We'll go to Vienna. I'll play piano. You'll draw. No one will care who we are." Lejla stared at the cracked ceiling. "Do you think the world is different outside this city?" "I think anywhere with you would be different," he said. They agreed. In 3 days, they would escape. But war doesn't wait. 2 days before they planned to leave, Lejla's home was hit by a mortar. Her mother and little sister were killed instantly. She was pulled from the rubble with her hair full of ash and blood in her eyes. Her sketchbook was still with her, miraculously untouched. She was taken to a makeshift hospital. Marko found her there, burned and bruised. She wouldn't speak, not a word. He stayed beside her for hours, whispering their plans, their memories, their future. She blinked but didn't answer. When she was strong enough to walk again, she told him quietly, "This is where I'm meant to die. You need to leave." He tried to argue, but she wouldn't listen. She gave him the sketchbook. He left Sarajevo that night, angry and heartbroken, hiding in the back of a truck filled with silence and shadows. When he crossed the border into Croatia, he cried for the first time since the war began. Years passed. Marko rebuilt a life in Vienna. He played in concert halls across Europe. People applauded his music, but he never played the songs they used to share, not even once. Every year, on the same date, he received a package. Inside was always a single sketch: a wounded dove, a piano on fire, a broken bridge under moonlight. No name. But he knew. Lejla never left Sarajevo. She became one of the city's most haunting artists. Her exhibitions drew visitors from around the world, but she never appeared at them. She didn't want applause. Her studio was full of unfinished drawings and silence. She never married, never gave interviews. Her neighbors said she talked in her sleep. Soft names, a language only one person could understand. In 2012, Marko was invited to perform in Sarajevo for a peace concert, 20 years after the siege began. He almost didn't go, but something, maybe love, pulled him back. He walked into the theater that once echoed with his dreams, now restored, but still holding scars. The audience was quiet as he sat at the piano. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, without looking at the sheet music, he played. He played her song. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman sat in the very back. Thin, pale, eyes like memory. She watched him play with a heart that still beat in broken time. And when he finished, she slipped out before he could see her again. The next morning, a letter arrived at his hotel. Inside, a single sketch: 2 mountain swans flying over Sarajevo's rooftops. At the bottom, in her handwriting, "Goodbye, my swan." Later that day, he found out she had passed away the night before. Alone, in her studio, her hands still holding a pencil. He kept that sketch by his piano for the rest of his life. He never played publicly again. But every evening, in his quiet home by the sea, he sat at the keys and played for her. Because some loves don't live happily ever after. Some just live, in songs, in sketches, in the space between memory and loss. And even now, they say, if you walk along the river in Sarajevo at sunset, you might see 2 swans flying low across the sky. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint sound of music. A story about love, betrayal, and the cost of staying silent. In a dusty town nestled between the green hills of El Salvador, there lived a girl named Isabella. She was 16, with quiet brown eyes and hands that knew work too early. Her days began before the sun did, making tortillas in the plaza, fetching water, caring for her younger siblings. Her nights were for school books and candlelight, dreams flickering between pages. War was always near, like the heat that never left the air. The soldiers marched through the streets in green uniforms, their boots loud on stone. Sometimes people disappeared. One day Isabella's mother went out to buy medicine and never came home. Her father had already vanished years ago, swallowed by the mountains where rebels fought for a different future. No one talked about it. You just learned how to live with empty chairs. Then came Alejandro. He arrived like a rumor, straight from the capital, wearing clean shoes and eyes that had seen too much. People whispered that he came from money, that his uncle was a military colonel, that he had gotten into trouble. Isabella didn't trust him. He didn't belong in their town. But one afternoon, when a boy tried to steal her stuff, Alejandro stepped in. "Pick on someone else," he said. He didn't raise his fists, just stood there with calm eyes. The boy backed off. After that, they talked, slowly, carefully. In a world full of things they couldn't say, their words became little secrets. Alejandro read Neruda aloud, and Isabella laughed at the way he stumbled through Spanish metaphors. They spoke of music, of their dreams. She wanted to teach one day, open a small school with flowers by the windows. He wanted to escape his family's name and become someone who didn't have to hide. They kissed under a mango tree outside town, where no one could see them. That kiss wasn't just about love, it was a promise. We will not become what this place wants us to be. But promises are fragile in times of war. The town grew darker. Soldiers searched homes at night. Names were whispered. People watched. A bomb exploded at the market one morning. 12 dead. The army said rebels were hiding in plain sight. That night, they raided the school. Isabella was taken, blindfolded, dragged from her bed. They said she was working with the guerrilla fighters, feeding them information. She said nothing, even as they hit her. She thought of her siblings. She thought of Alejandro. She didn't cry. She was her father's daughter. The next morning, the cell door opened. A man in uniform stood there. "You're free," he said. "You've been cleared." No explanation. Alejandro was waiting outside the gates. She collapsed into his arms, shaking. "You saved me," she whispered. He said nothing, just held her tighter. What she didn't know was that Alejandro had given names to save her. Names of rebels, real ones. Names he had overheard from his uncle's conversations. Some of those men were already dead. Others, maybe not. He told himself it was the only way. She was innocent. He had to save her. But guilt has sharp teeth. 3 days later, they fled the country. They hid in trucks, paid smugglers, crossed rivers and borders under moonlight. At the edge of every checkpoint, Alejandro held her hand and whispered, "Almost there." By the time they reached Los Angeles, they were exhausted, bruised, and completely alone. They married in silence. No white dress, no flowers, just two people who had seen too much. Their life in America was not a dream. It was hard work and empty fridges, cleaning homes that weren't theirs and saving every dollar. Alejandro worked construction. Isabella cleaned apartments. They never spoke of the war, never said El Salvador out loud. She tried to forget the sound of the cell door closing behind her. He tried to forget the names he gave. Years passed. Isabella planted flowers on their apartment balcony. Alejandro fixed broken furniture with soft hands. Sometimes, when they sat on the old couch at night, she would lean into his shoulder and ask, "Do you think we did the right thing?" He always said yes, but his eyes said something else. One morning in 2007, Alejandro fell at work, 3 stories, gone in seconds. At the funeral, Isabella sat alone. No children, no family, just her and the priest and the hum of wind. Back home, she opened the old box he told her never to touch. Inside were documents, army files, maps, names, and one letter. "I did it, Isa. I saved you, but it cost me. I gave them names to buy your freedom. I hated myself for it, but I would do it again. You were the only thing worth saving." She didn't cry. She folded the letter, placed it back inside, and burned everything. The next day, she flew back to El Salvador. The town had changed. New buildings, new people. But the tree, the mango tree, was still there. Bare branches, but standing. She started teaching again, in a small tin-roof classroom with barefoot children and chalk-covered hands. She taught them how to read, how to hope, how to hold a pencil like it mattered. Sometimes at sunset, she sat beneath that old tree and whispered his name, not out of grief, but because some stories never really end. Some loves don't live forever, but they leave something behind. And sometimes the people who break us are also the ones who save us.